Welcome to the British Embassy. I'm Alison Kemp, the British Ambassador here since 2017. The UK and Montenegro have been friends and allies for over 140 years. One of the most testing times for both our countries was the Second World War, where the people of Montenegro suffered greatly in the theatre of war in the Balkans. One of the most heroic and little-known episodes of the war occurred 75 years ago in Brezna, near Plujine. Today, I and my team are going to Brezna to learn more about what happened there and the impact on local people. So here we are on the road to Brezna, 30 kilometers from Nikšić in the direction of Plujine and Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's a valley on the Piva River basin and is the place of scarce population and stark beauty. Nowadays, it's better known for mountain biking and ecotourism, but it hides a history of self-sacrifice and the lengths two people will go to fight for their freedoms. So we've arrived at the signpost of Brezna. This is the starting point for one of the most dramatic stories of the war in the Balkans. A spectacular example of where local people, partisans and the British worked together to evacuate more than 1,000 wounded partisans and Allied aircrew. This evacuation, which the Allies called Operation Brezna, happened at a desperate time in war in Montenegro. Our understanding of Operation Brezna is based on the modest historical data recorded by historians and veterans. But the best account comes from the locals who played an incredibly important part in the operation and were eyewitnesses to this historic event. Post-war politics meant that this action, which was celebrated at the time, has been ignored and minimized for much of the last 60 years. I was amazed when I heard the efforts and logistics involved in the operation, which came within minutes of failure and of the cost that local people paid for their heroism.
Njihova lica odaju optimizam, veru da će se ponovo vratiti I podići svoja uništena ognjišta.
The Second World War turned Montenegro into both an arena for European forces in the struggle between fascism and liberty, and the location of a brutal civil war between partisans and Chetniks. Together, these two vicious conflicts broke hearts and turned brother against brother, with consequences that have echoed down the decades. In June 1944, the British-led Balkan Air Force was created to carry the air war to the enemy and aid the partisan forces directly. By July 1944, the Balkan Air Force had flown over 2,400 sorties, including dropping supplies, bombing Germans, and airlifting the wounded to Bari in Italy. But a new countrywide German offensive started in July 1944, and by August, partisans were in retreat and pinned down by German forces around Durmitor and Shavnik. The partisans were beleaguered, severely outnumbered, and under constant bombardment from the Germans, and struggling to protect a growing number of wounded. transporting the stretcher cases was resource intensive in these mountains. Every stretcher bearer was one less able-bodied fighter, man or woman.
Oni su značili veliki teret, slabili manevarsku sposobnost naših ljudi. Ostaviti ih? Nikad.
Some of the wounded had been travelling for months, with minimal medical attention, and the situation was dire. The partisans would only be able to fight effectively if the wounded were removed, but the Germans now controlled all the airports in the north of Montenegro, including Njegovodje and Berane. Escape seemed impossible, but the British had decided that something must be done. Two Special Operations Executive Officers, Flight Lieutenant Thomas Mattis and Flight Lieutenant Philip Lawson, were sent to the Dermator region to identify a suitable site for an airfield. After 2 days of reconnaissance on foot, the British officers determined that this 760-metre strip of sloping ground was the only option.
Dobar dan, domaćine. Hvala vama, drago mi je. I hvala za vaš dobrodošli. Odlično, odlično.
Pa toga 22. avgusta 1944. godine neko je pripremio narod, pa smo mi doznali posebno, ja se sjećam da je kod nas došla tetka i kazala da svi treba da bježimo jer će biti neka velika borba, da Njemci nadiru od Dolomitora preko Komarnice. Mi nijesmo znali uopšte tada ni da će biti taj aerodrom. Svaki je imao da beži što prije, da se izgubi.
With the Germans surrounding the valley and closing in fast, there was no time to lose. It must have felt like mission impossible to turn an area of unharvested crops, fences, rocks and trenches into a landing zone in less than 2 days, with the men fighting off the Germans and everyone else working around the clock to get the airfield ready.
Pričali su mi stariji od nas da su obično noću vršili obilježavanje i da su oni sa ceste uzimali kamenje u veličini najviše jajeta da naprave neke oznake. Dobro se sjećam tih oznaka, one su godinama bili tamo. To je kao latinsko slovo L ili tako nešto.
I can't imagine what it must have been like for the villagers to destroy the food they were growing to see them through the winter, knowing that they also faced brutal punishment for the Germans for supporting the partisans and the British. At the beginning of the construction work, a dispatch arrived in the area from the partisans' supreme headquarters, sent by the partisan hero Radoje Dakic, asking for the wounded to be brought to Brezna from the surrounding areas.
Pravi se aerodrom na Brezni, bit će gotov 21. avgusta. Sa tim je saglasan i šef engleske vojne misije. Avioni mogu slijetati samo danju i očekujemo ih navedenog dana poslije podne. Ranjenika imamo oko 1000. Javite hitno radi dopreme ranjenika.
Ranjenici su skupljani tu iz svih delova Crne Gore, nošeni su i opet pretežno noću. Doznao sam da su pretežno nošenje ranjenika vršile djevojke. Malo je muškaraca bilo sposobnih za vojsku da nije u nekoj jedinici.
During the course of the construction of the runway itself, 2 British Spitfire aircraft flew over Brezna and threw out a message packet with a notification that 6 British and Allied Dakotas would land every hour. Each plane could take 30 wounded, and that it was imperative that the defence line around the airfield held against the continuing German attack for the duration of the evacuation, and that evacuation would be cancelled in case of rain. Locals and partisans worked together and completed an airfield of 760 by 73 meters in only 40 hours and assembled nearly 1,000 wounded.
Vrlo kratko vrijeme to bilo i mislim da je ta koordinacija između vojske partizanske bila izvanredna jer je to zaista i sa današnje tačke gledišta skoro nemoguća stvar ako se borbe vodile kako što jesu gore i tako dalje.
About 10 years ago, we erected a monument in Brezna to commemorate this event. I've asked Lieutenant Colonel Bojan Popadić to join me here today and tell me a bit more about what it must have been like to fly those planes in those conditions at this airfield.
Stvarno je bio jedan veliki poduhvat i da kažem jedna od najuspješnijih vazdušnih akcija u Drugom svjetskom ratu. Taj avion Dakota ili ta vojna varijanta C-47 koju su koristili, koja je bila u britanskoj vojsci u Drugom svjetskom ratu, je bila za to vrijeme dobro opremljena, ali za taj poduhvat da nađe se ovako malo mjesto je stvarno sa tom opremom gdje su koristili, da kažem, maltene samo magnetni kompas i koristili kurs, brzinu, vrijeme i kartu, doći sa tolikim brojem je stvarno bio veliki poduhvat.
The pilot found navigating between the Vojnik mountain and the surrounding hills challenging, with steep ascents and descents needed to avoid both the hills and German fire. As the columns of Dakotas swept in, British Spitfires flew alongside them, trying to protect them.
Sletiti na ovome prostoru i polijetati sa ovoga prostora, to je, ja mislim, i u današnje vrijeme baš teško izvoditi. Zbog čega je ovdje teže? Ovdje, da kažem, i ovaj teren je pod nagibom i sama orografija oko samog, da kažem, aerodroma ovog improvizovanog i ovog letilišta je stvarno nevjerovatna. Ovdje imate Vojnik gdje je dan danas teško letjeti pored njega jer zbog samog utjecaja planine ima dosta turbulencije, tako da su oni bili u to vrijeme primorani da polijeću u jednom pravcu, da slijeću u drugom pravcu. Nadmorska visina je ovdje isto 1000 metara, a sa povećanjem nadmorske visine opada i gustina vazduha, što sve remeti, da kažem, performanse aviona.
To guide the planes into land, white parachute canopies were laid out. The letter L was picked out with white stones, and grass fires lit to show the wind direction. Everything was ready. On August the 22nd, 1944, at 9 o'clock in the morning, both locals and wounded gathered to see the first plane land in their village. There was a great joy amongst the wounded, who'd been staring up at the sky all morning.
Mi kao djeca, čim smo osjetili i čuli te avioni i tu buku, kažem, brat mi je popeo se bio na neko drvo i sjećam se toga da on kaže nema dima, pa znači nije ih srušili. Jer smo stekli taj utisak da oni sjajni avioni ruše ove dole, ali to je bila taka zaglušujuća buka, to je nešto nevjerovatno. I to je bilo čitav dan. Ja mislim da je negdje posle 8 sati to počelo i da je negdje možda u 4 do 5 sati trajalo.
In total, 36 flights of Dakota aircraft arrived that day, 6 an hour, with each plane taking approximately 25 minutes to load. Although the British had calculated that each flight could take up to 30 wounded, in some cases the malnutrition and thinness of the wounded meant that some flights took up to 50 casualties.
Avion je bio pun. Kada su zatvorili vrata, prvo ste čuli stari ljudi, pa je počelo truskanje, poskakivanje, zapinjanje točkova kao da avion hvatao zalet. Onda je avion napravio krug iznad Krnova, Nikšića, Podgorice, Bara pa preko Jadrana. Oni koji su mogli vidjeti kroz prozor, pričali su nama šta vide. Kad smo sletili, izlazili su prvo oni što su mogli sami, a tek su onda bolničari dolazili po nas sa nosilima.
Records of the operation suggest that up to 1,059 wounded Yugoslavs and 17 Allied airmen were evacuated on the flights. As each plane landed in Italy, the evacuated let out a cheer. Those evacuated received medical treatment in Italy or Malta, and those that recovered returned to military training, preparing for the liberation of Yugoslavia. The last Dakota flight took off around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the stretcher bearers returned to the fight. They held the Germans long enough, but ultimately in vain. Brezna was taken over by the Germans 8 hours later. All sides suffered heavy losses in Brezna, but the greatest price was paid by the locals. The battle around Brezna left an indelible mark. Even years later, the sound of a plane overhead or a shotgun on the hills was enough to make women flee with children into the forests and hide until they were convinced that the Germans had not returned. For me, I've lived and worked in places where bombs go off on a daily basis. But I can't begin to imagine what it must have been like for the villagers here in Brezna, or for those caught up in the following year in the Balkan Air Force bombing of the German retreat, which I know caused significant casualties. Montenegro, together with the rest of Europe, paid a heavy price in the war. British SOE Colonel William Dakin described his experiences with Tito in Dermator in 1943 as an epic being fought within a cauldron. "We have been pulled into a closed and simple world," he said. "We have no past, and the future could be counted out by minutes." I imagine that's what it must have felt like here in August 1944. Here in Brezna, I'm struck by the courage and audacity of all those involved. To turn this field into an airstrip, to support and sometimes carry 1,000 wounded under an August sun, and all under fire and fear of your lives. To sacrifice your crops, to stay behind to defend homes and families, to stare an uncertain and dangerous future in the face and work to help the most vulnerable. That's bravery and that's sacrifice. As the British ambassador, I see this as one of the most defining moments in the relationship between the UK and Montenegro. We stood shoulder to shoulder in this field 75 years ago, helping the wounded and combating shared threats. We continue to work together today to promote security and stability in Europe, and we stand shoulder to shoulder now as friends, partners and allies, as we did then.